welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's been on a lot of minds, I think, the climate crisis. And to help us really unpack this, we're going to be looking at Generation Nero, Burning the Future by Gregory C.R. Williams. It's the first in his Generations trilogy, and it really pulls no punches. But it's not just about laying out the problems. It's about understanding why we seem to be stuck in this pattern of inaction. And that's where you come, you're going to help us sort of connect the dots between the science, the history, and these big systemic issues that Williams really digs into in Generation Nero.
Yeah, you know what I think is so powerful about this book is that it doesn't just lay out the problems in this really dry way. It brings in all these different voices, the experts and activists and people who are on the front lines of this crisis every day.
Okay, so are you ready to dive in?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, great. So one of the things that really kind of grabbed me in Generation Nero is this idea of a 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. It sounds almost insignificant, right? Like 1.5 degrees, how bad could that be? But Williams makes it really clear that exceeding this seemingly small temperature increase could have truly disastrous consequences for the planet.
It's like a tipping point,
So what's the science behind this?
Yeah, it's not just a random number. It's decades of research from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they've identified this 1.5 degrees Celsius mark as being a critical threshold. We can't cross it without triggering these irreversible changes.
So the Earth's climate system is complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also incredibly sensitive.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so help me understand what actually happens when we cross that line.
Okay, so picture this.
Yeah.
You've got these vibrant coral reefs teeming with life, right? But they're incredibly sensitive to temperature changes. And in a world that's warmer by just 1.5 degrees Celsius, we're talking near total extinction.
Oh.
Yeah, it's entire reefs from Indonesia to the Great Barrier Reef just bleached and lifeless. That's 25% of marine life gone, fisheries collapsing, coastal communities devastated.
It's hard to even imagine that.
Yeah, and it's not just the coral reefs. That 1.5 degree increase, it also supercharges extreme weather. More frequent and intense hurricanes, longer droughts, heavier rainfall. Imagine the impact on agriculture, especially in regions that are already vulnerable, like sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in those statistics. But I think what Williams does so well is he brings in those personal stories, right?
Yeah.
He talks about sinking islands in the Pacific, scorched farmlands in the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
These aren't just numbers. These are real people in real places.
One of the things that I think Generation Nero does really well is connect the dots between the science and the human stories.
And what's crazy is that this isn't new information. Williams actually dives into the history of climate awareness in the book.
Yeah.
And it turns out a scientist back in the 1800s actually predicted this greenhouse effect. It's mind-blowing.
I know, right?
Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Okay, so back in 1896, this Swedish scientist named Svante Arrhenius, he published this groundbreaking paper about the impact of burning fossil fuels, especially coal. Now get this, this was before cars and planes were even common.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was already warning that doubling carbon dioxide in the atmosphere could lead to a temperature increase of 5 to 6 degrees Celsius.
So this knowledge has been around for over a century.
Absolutely.
So did those early warnings just get lost in the noise of progress?
That's exactly it. Generation Nero kind of paints this vivid picture of the time. You've got wars, you've got economic crises, political upheavals, all these major world events kind of overshadowing these scientific findings.
Yep.
The focus was really on industrial growth, pushing the boundaries of what humans could achieve. And environmental concerns were largely just ignored.
So we knew about the risk, but we didn't act. And one of the things that Generation Nero really digs into is the politics behind this. Why didn't we act?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things it points to is politics.
Right. And one of the most powerful forces that Williams exposes in the book is the fossil fuel industry. And their grip on policy decisions, these are powerful interests that have been really effective at stalling any kind of meaningful action.
Yeah, and he doesn't just say that. He gives some pretty stark examples.
Oh, yeah.
Like Australia and their resistance to phasing out coal.
Yeah, Australia is a perfect example. They are one of the world's biggest per capita carbon emitters. But their government has consistently prioritized the interests of the coal industry, even as the country is increasingly suffering from these devastating climate impacts.
Yeah, like those horrific bushfires we saw a few years ago.
Exactly.
So it feels like a classic case of short-term profit over long-term sustainability.
Absolutely.
And then there's, when the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Agreement.
Oh, yeah, under the Trump administration.
That was a major setback for global climate action, right?
Major step.
Is a clear signal that national interests, even at the expense of the environment, were taking priority over global responsibility.
Exactly. And, it's not just about one bad policy or one country. Williams argues that it's a systemic problem that's baked into the global economic order.
Yeah, he makes a really powerful case that our relentless pursuit of economic growth is fundamentally at odds with environmental sustainability.
It is.
And, Williams doesn't just point fingers at governments, though. He also digs into the role of economics in driving this inaction. And the numbers are pretty shocking.
They are.
Did you know that global fossil fuel subsidies total a staggering $5.9 trillion annually?
Just trillion with a T.
Yeah, trillion with a T.
And it completely dwarfs the investments in renewable energy.
It's mind-boggling.
It is.
We're basically propping up the very industries that are driving this climate crisis.
It creates this illusion that fossil fuels are affordable, which makes it even harder for renewables to compete.
Yeah, and he highlights examples like China's rapid industrialization. Millions of people were lifted out of poverty, but at a huge environmental cost.
Right, pollution, habitat destruction, the list goes on.
And he's careful to point out, it's not about blaming China. It's a pattern we see everywhere. It's this prioritization of short-term economic gain over the long-term health of the environment.
Exactly.
It's a systemic issue.
It is. It's one of those systems that really kind of got us here.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one to break.
It is.
Generation Nero really forces us to confront the deep-seated systems that got us to where we are today.
Yeah, it's a great book. It really makes you think.
It does.
And it's not just about pointing fingers. It's about understanding how we got here and where we go from here.
Absolutely.
So that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into Generation Nero, Burning the Future. We'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the challenges and potential solutions to the climate crisis. Thanks for listening.